Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one-dimensional arrays in C++, and we'll be covering the following topics. We will learn how to declare arrays, we will learn how to initialize arrays, we will learn about partial initialization of arrays, how to print an array using a for loop, how to declare and manipulate data into arrays. Lastly, we will cover an example, which is 5 days sales program that we will talk more about at the end of the video and we will implement in C++ Visual Studio. If you're finding these videos helpful, please subscribe, like, and comment to my channel, the Computer Engineering Notebook. So now let's switch to Visual Studio and see how we can declare an array. So to declare an array, we'll start with the data type, which could be int, double, character, any data type in C++, followed by the array name, which is of your choice. And then in between square brackets, we're going to have an integer expression, which is any integer number, which is not negative. So for example, let's declare an array of data type double. So we can do double, let's say call it sales. And then this array will include 5 elements if we set the number in between the square brackets to 5. Also, there's another way to declare this array. So instead of declaring the size of the array here as 5, so we can give it any name that we want, its size, but we need to define it here as a global variable. So we can do constant int size equal, so we can give it any number that we want it as an integer. So if we do this, this is the same thing as we did earlier. Also, what we can do, we can declare an array of type characters. So char, letters, for example, let's keep the same size, or let's give it size of 3. Also, we declared another array that we called letters that can contain 3 elements. Let's also declare an array that contain integers. So let's call it numbers. And let's assume this array will contain also 5 elements. So this is how we can declare an array. Also, what we can do, we can initialize arrays at declaration. So in order to initialize arrays at declaration, so let's assume here we want to initialize some values here. So equal, so we need open, close curly bracket, and then the elements should be separated by comma. So let's say the first sales point is 499, and then the second element is 2. The third element is, let's assume it's 750. And then the fourth element, let's assume it's any number 999. And then 1499. So this way we declared this array that we called sales. It contained 5 elements of type double. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then for letters, if we want to also initialize some values here, so what we can do also in between curly brackets, so we can declare 3 letters. So let's call them A, B, and C. For this array that we called numbers, it will contain integer type of data. So let's call them any 5 integers. So 5, 4, 9, 19, and 2. So most importantly, so the array should contain the same data type. So we cannot include here for this double, we cannot include double and characters in this array. So it should be the same data type within an array. Also, another important note that the indexing of the array starts with 0. So if we want to print the first element of any array, so we need to print it as sales of 0. So this will print the first element, or letters of 0. This will print the first element, numbers of 0. And then the last element of the array is its size minus 1. So for this one, the last indexing element will be 4. So we start counting 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's try to print the first element of each array. So cout, we can use a cout. Then to print the first element of sales, so we can do sales of 0, which is the first element. Let's start a new line. And then let's also print the first element of the second array we define, which is letters. So to do this, letters of 0, new line. And then also to print the first element of the arrays we called numbers. So we can do numbers of 0. And also we can do a new line. And then let's execute this program. And there we go. So we printed the first element of sales, which was 499. We printed the first element of this array that contained character type of data, which is A. And then also we printed the first element of this array, which is number 5. So next, let's see how we can print the entire array. So we're gonna do this easily using a for loop. So let's get rid of this. And let's use a for loop. Let's assume we want to print the elements of these 3 arrays. So we use a for loop. We start at I equals 0 because the first element starts at 0. And then I less than, let's assume we want to print the elements of the first array, which is sales. So this contains 5 elements. So we want to do I less than the size of this array, which is 5. And then at each iteration, we want to increment. We want to do I plus plus. And then simply see out sales of I. And then how we want to separate them? We can separate them by space. So let's do that first. And then this should print all the elements in the array we called sales. So let's do this. So let's execute this program. And there we go. We printed all of these elements separated by a space. Let's say we want to separate, let's say we want to print them as a column. So we're going to start a new line instead of the space. So simply we can start a new line using end line. And then let's re-execute this program. There we go. We print it as a column. So 499, 2, and so forth. If we wanted to print the elements of the character array, so simply we can do I less than 3. And then instead of sales, we're going to use letters. And then if we execute this program, this should print A, B, and C on a new line, A, B, and C. And then if we execute this program, this should print the elements of this array, each element on a new line, because we used end L at the end. So there you go, we have A, B, and C. So next, let's learn about partial initialization of arrays. So let's say we declared an array of size 5, but we only initialize the first 2 elements. So let's get rid of this, the last 3 elements, and only initialize the first 2 elements. So what this one will do, it will assign this element to index 0, and then this element to index 1 of the array, and the rest will be zeros. Now when we print sales, it should print the elements in the array, and then the rest should be 0. And then in sales, the size is 5, so we're going to do I less than 5. Let's execute this program. And this is what happens. So we have the first 2 elements that we initialize, and the rest are zeros. Also, let's see what happens if we declare an array, and then we put in between the curly brackets, we put 0. So this will assign 0 to all the elements of the array. So let's print this array. So we do numbers of I, and then the size is 5, so we're good here. So let's execute this program and see what we get on the output. So we declared an array, and then we initialized all its elements to 0. And lastly, let's go over our example. So this will teach us how we can manipulate data into array using for loops. So in this example, it's asking to write a C++ program that declares an array to store 5 days of sales data, prompts the user to enter the sales amounts for each of the 5 days, and then we should be outputting the total sum of all sales, the average sale amount per day, the largest sale amount, and which day it occurred. Okay, so let's get started. So first let's write our code here. So first we want to declare an array to store 5 days of sales data. So we know the size of the array is 5. So let's declare an array. So let's also declare it this way: constant int size equal 5. And here we need the data type that this array will contain. Since we're talking about sales, so this could contain decimal numbers. So we're gonna use double as data type. And then the name of the array, let's call it sales, and then size here. So we declared an array. We're not gonna initialize any numbers of this array because the ask is to prompt the user to enter sales amounts of each of the 5 days. So those numbers will change according to the sales amount. So in order to do this, so we're gonna ask the user to do this. But before this, let's initialize or declare some variables. So what we need the sum. So this should be type double as well, or could be type double. And then we need the average. Let's call it AVG. We need the largest sale amount. So let's call it largest sale. And then also we need at which day it occurred. So which day, this is an integer. So int, so let's call it max index. So first step, we want to ask the user to enter the sales amount. So in order to do this, we're going to use a for loop. So first we're going to print something at the screen to ask the user to enter the sales amount of each day. So we're going to tell enter, we're going to use a cout and then type enter 5 sales amounts. And then we can do a new line after this. And now what we want to do, we want to store these 5 sales amounts in the array we called sales. So in order to do this, we're going to use a for loop, and then we're going to loop through all the elements of the array, and let's call it I, start with 0, and then as long as I is less than the size of the array, which is 5, then we're going to increment I++. And then inside it, we're going to use cn sales of I. So what this one will do at the first iteration, when I is 0, we're going to take this number and then insert it as the first element, which is index 0 in this array. And then the second loop, we're going to do sales of 1, which is the second element, sales of 3, which is the third element, and so forth. We can also make it a little bit more intuitive. Before this cn, we can type out at the screen cout sale of day. So day 1 will be the I plus 1, because we're going to start with 0, but we cannot say, it doesn't make sense to say the sale of day 0. So we're going to start sale of day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in order to do this, we're going to just simply add 1 to the I. So we're going to say sale of day I plus 1. Simply, we're going to add 1 to the index here. And then we can do colon space. So we're done with this step. So next, we're going to calculate the sum, the average, the largest number. So let's start with the sum. So let's do a new line after we're done with this loop. So let's start a new line. And then to find the sum, we declared a variable of type double we called sum, but let's initialize it to 0. And then we're going to use also a for loop to loop through all the sales amount that are contained in the array. So in order to do this, it's going to be the same for loop here. So let's copy paste it, same format. And then what we're going to do, we're going to just like simply add these numbers. In order to do this, at every iteration, we're going to do sum equals sum plus sales of each index. So sales of I. So probably I can explain this for loop just like the first 2 or 3 iterations. So what's happening here? So in the first iteration, when I equals 0, so when I equals 0, so what we're doing sum equal, which is, that's why we declare it to 0. So sum equals 0 plus the sales of the first index. So the index is sales of I, sales of 0. So this is the first element of the array. So let's assume our array looks like this: 2, 3, 1, 8, and let's say 10. So 0 plus the first element is 2. So the first iteration, the sum will be equal to 2. And the second iteration, when I equal 1, we're going to do also sum equal, sum from here is 2 plus sales of I, which is, sorry, this I equal 1 here. So sales of 1, which is the second element in the array, so plus a 3, this will be equal 5. Let's do one more iteration and that's it. So when I equal 2, so what we're going to do, sum equal sum, which is 5, plus sales of 2, which is the third element in the array, so 5 plus 1, so this will be sum equals 6, and so forth. So we add all of these numbers together. So next we want to get the average sale amount. So this will be very simple because we have the sum. So the average we called AVG equal sum divided by the total sale points, which is 5. And then lastly, we want to get 2 things: the largest sale amount and which day it occurred. So for this one, that's why we define max index is the day we have the largest sale. So let's assume the first day is where we have the largest sale. So let's assume max index equals 0. 0 is the first element in the array. I should be capitalized. Okay, so now there's no error. And then also we're going to use a for loop But for this one, we can use the same thing, I equals 0, but be careful, we want to start from the second element. So we're going to use I equal 1. As long as I is less than 5, we're going to increment I plus plus. So let me explain this one before we continue writing our code. Let me explain it here on the side. So to make it more clearer. So let's take the same array. Let's assume this, the user entered 2, 3, 1, 8, and 10. So this has 5 elements. So this index here, we agreed this starts at 0, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4. So first we want to find the day where the highest sales occurred and what is the sale amount. So what we did here when we did max index equals 0, so we're assuming the first element in the array is the day which has the highest sale. So what we did, let me call it max, let me rewrite it here, max index equal 0. And then inside this for loop, we started iterating from 1 because we want to start from the second element. We're not worried about the first one anymore. And then inside it, what we're going to use, we're going to use an if statement. And then the logic in this if statement, we're going to use if the sales of this max index we assume it's the largest, but what if it's smaller than the next one? So we're going to compare it to each element at every iteration. If the sales of max index is smaller than the sales of the second element, which is we have it as I, so sales of I. So what we're going to do in this case, so let's assume this is the first iteration. So we have 2, we're going to compare 2 to 3. Is 2 less than 3? This is true. Then what we're interested in the largest. So what we're going to do, we're going to do max index is equal to I. So what we're doing here, we're trying to find the day where we have the highest sale. Then we're going to go to the second iteration, and then I will become 2 in this iteration. Here I was 1. And now max index is equal to I, which is I is 1, right? And then now we're going to compare. So the sales of max index, so the sales of max index is number 3, is the element of the array. So we have to distinguish between two things, the element and the index. So we're going to compare 3 to the next element, which is 1, because this is sales of 2. Sales of 2 is the third element in the array. So is a 3 less than sales of 2 is 1, right? Is a 3 less than 1? This is incorrect. So far we had the max index equal 1. Let's go through the third iteration. So to get better understanding of this, so now we have I equal 3. And now we're going to compare two things. The sales of the max index, which is the max index is still 1. So the sales of 1 is a 3. Again, we're going to compare 3. Is it less than or equal than sales of I equal 3. So now we're comparing to 8. Is a 3 less than 8? True. And now we're gonna change max index will become I in this case is a 3. So now this is the day where we have the highest sale. So let's go through the fourth iteration, which is the last iteration. So now I equal 4. And then now we're gonna compare the sales of the max index, the sales of 3 were still 8 here. So is 8 less than the sales of I is 4. The sales of 4 is 10. Is 8 less than 10? This is correct. Then now we have the max index become I, which is 4 in this case. So we know the day where we have the highest sale is at index 4, which is the last element of the array in this case. I hope this made it clearer. So let's continue writing our code. So we said we need an if statement, and then literally we have it here. So the sales of max index, is it less than the sales of I? And what we're gonna do here, we're gonna do max index equal I. And then now after this for statement, so we can also now, we know the largest sale. So the largest sale is equal, feel free to pause the video and kind of conclude what is the largest sale, which is the sales of which index of the max index. Max index. So this is it for the program. Now we covered everything. So we have the sum, the average, the largest sale amount, and which day it occurred, which is the max index. Here we need brackets. There you go. And then here I, we need to define it as int I. So next, all we have to do is display the results. So first, let's print the sum. So the total sales is sum, and let's do a new line. Let's also print the average. So average daily sales, we call it AVG. Also, let's start a new line. And then lastly, we want to print the largest sale. So cout largest sale, we can have the $sign, and then what we called it, largest sale. So largest sale, let's do space on day, let's also do space, and then which day, as we said, we're gonna do, the day is gonna be the max index plus 1, because we start indexing from 0, but the 0 index is day 1, so we wanna add 1 to it. And the second index, which is index 1 in the array, is day 2. So index 1 is 1 plus 1, which is day 2. So we do max index plus 1. And this should be it. So we can start also a new line. Now let's execute this program and see what we get on the output. So we're asking the user to enter the sale amount of each day. So this will be, let's say 150.50, 275.25. Let's say the third day is 89.99. Fourth day is 420. Fifth day, let's say 500. Enter. So the total sales is 1435.74. The average daily sales is 287.148. And then the largest sale, it says 500, which is on day 5. So which is the last element in the array. So let's try another set. Let's do something very simple. Let's do 1, 5, 1, 1, and 1. So the total sales is 9. The average daily sales is 1.8. And then the largest sale is $5 on day 2. So this is it for this tutorial. I hope this was helpful on arrays in C++. Thanks for watching. I appreciate if you can subscribe, comment, and like this video.